9 days away as of August 14th. We are 9 days from college football. We're in the single digits, so not this weekend, but next weekend we will have Farmageddon, Kansas State and Iowa State playing in Ireland. Unfortunately, not a home game. Not really sure why we continue to do this thing in Ireland. I wish that honestly we would either move some games up, have some better games week 0, or just not have it at all. Because after that first, after week 0, that first game, one decent game you have that weekend, it's just a brutal next week waiting for week 1 to start. But nevertheless, it's college football. I will take it. But that being said, today, the prediction special for the 2025 season starts now. Going to kick things off in the Southeastern Conference here. Going to start in the state of Georgia. So, Georgia, how are we going to do this season? Well, the over/under is 9.5. I'm predicting that they will go over and finish 10-2. So your schedule is pretty tough. You've got 7 winnable games and probably, I would say, 5 that are losable. Now, all of these predictions, let me get this out of the way. I'm doing this from the perspective of the team that I'm talking about. So there's going to be some overlap, like, Bama. That Georgia-Bama game, that's a losable game for both teams. It's also, it's obviously winnable, but I'm going to have that in the losable category. But it's losable for both teams. Obviously, someone's going to win it, but just want to get that out of the way to avoid any possible confusion. I do want to say as well that I'm not going to spend too much time on it, but with transfer portal, NIL, all that, the way talent's spread across the sport now, 9-3, I think, is kind of the new 10-2. 8-4 is kind of the new 9-3. 9-3 and so on. We're going to see a lot less teams going undefeated, a lot less 11-1s as conferences, bulk up. SEC adding Texas and Oklahoma, Big Ten, adding Oregon, the Washington, teams from California. So conferences are tougher, talent spread thinner. It's going to be, that's kind of how records are going to start to play out. And, someone's going to go 8-4 this year, and it's going to be a really good year, but it's not going to be looked at that way. So regardless, same thing with 9-3. But Georgia, 10-2. So Marshall, Austin Peay got at Tennessee. Game looks a lot easier now than it did 6 months ago. Kentucky, Ole Miss, at Mississippi State and Charlotte. Obviously, these are some all very winnable games. I feel really, really solid about those 7 games for the Georgia Bulldogs. Your losable games, Alabama, at Auburn, Florida, Texas, and Georgia Tech. Bama speaks for itself. At Auburn, you're going to their place. Very tough place to play. They, big wild card team. They could be improved massively. They may not be, but, they gave it their best shot last year, so it's not going to be a team to overlook. Florida, should be better. Texas, you beat them twice last year, but, you do have to play them again. Fortunately, that is a home game. In Georgia Tech, who famously took you to 8 overtimes, you have them on the schedule as well. So those 7 winnable games, like I said, if you can get 3 of your losable, then, that puts you at 10-2. So if I'm guessing right now, I'd put Auburn, Florida, and Georgia Tech as the 3 of your losable games that are most winnable. That puts you at 10-2 with losses to Alabama and Texas. Obviously, going week to week as the season continues, I'm going to break down teams each week, go over games, and this is just kind of a preseason prediction. It's not, whenever we come to game week for Georgia, Texas, it may be pretty obvious one way or the other who's going to win that game, for example. So, but Chick-fil-A tea. Moving on. Florida, I've got you going 8-4 this year, which, I'm sure you've heard it. If you are into college football, if you follow college football, you've heard it 1,000 times. Florida, an 8-4 Florida is going to be a really good Florida team. And, that may be true, but still not really overall what we want. But I'll hammer that nail again. The schedule's tough, so winnable games, however, Long Island, USF, I put at Miami as winnable for you because I expect you to elevate and them to kind of fall off a little bit. It's also not exactly the toughest place to play in college football down there. So Mississippi State, obviously that's a winnable game for pretty much everyone in the SEC. Same at Kentucky, unless you're Ole Miss. Tennessee, I'm not a big believer in Tennessee after a lot of events that have unfolded over this offseason. At Ole Miss, they're going to take a step back. Florida State, they're going to take a step forward from 2-10, but I still don't think that they're going to be good. Good as far as what we expect them to be. Losable games at LSU, very tough place to play. Texas at home this year, but mighty Texas, really good roster. It's gonna be a tough game. At A&M, tough place to play. They beat you last year, mollywopped you in the swamp, and that was a game that DJ Lagway played in. So they beat you with DJ Lagway. Texas, they did not have to play against him last year, but if they're lucky, they won't have to again this year, as DJ Lagway's had some injury concerns, but nevertheless, never root for injury. Hopefully he's there for that game. And then you've got Georgia. Those are your 4 losable games. So it's going to be threading the needle a little bit. That game at Miami, it's not, it's not just you can't just go through the motions. You're going to have to fight hard to win that one, but I think that you've got the edge there. Kind of same thing at Ole Miss and Tennessee, but same difference. Kind of think you have the edge. So I've got you going 8-4 with losses to LSU, Texas, Texas A&M, and Georgia. So speaking of Texas A&M, I'm gonna have to think how I want to say this. I think Texas A&M can be a better team than they were last year and still wind up going 8-4. And as infuriating as that may be, for those of you in Aggie land, that's just kind of the case. I think you've got a pretty tough schedule this year. But regardless, I will predict you to go 9-3, however. So the over-under for you, it was 7-5 last I checked. I think it might have gone up to 8.5. But regardless, I got the over on both. I think you're going to go 9-3. I am a believer in Texas A&M this year. You've got returning veterans all over, peppered on the offensive line. Everyone is a returning veteran on that offensive line of scrimmage. You've got probably a top 2 running back room, maybe the best in the SEC in your running back room. Probably top 3 to top 5 at worst in the entire country. That big 1-2 punch with Le'Veon Moss and Reuben Owens, considering no one gets hurt in camp like they did last year, with very experienced seasoned backs behind them and Amari Daniels and EJ Smith. I think you're going to have a hell of a running game this year. You've upgraded your talent at the wide receiver position. I am a believer in Marcel Reed, highly dynamic athlete at the quarterback position. He throws the ball well, a lot better than people give him credit for. Obviously runs very well too. He, I think, has the potential to be a breakthrough, I don't want to say Heisman contender, but I think he's got the talent. I think he's got the opportunity to put himself in or near that conversation this year. I am a believer in him and their offense. They had the best scoring offense in the SEC last year, guys. So it's not like we were bad last year on the offensive side of the ball. The offense is not why they lost games. They did not lose to USC because of offense. Same thing, they did not lose to Auburn because of offense. They lost those games because of defense, which, speaking of the defense, you're replacing talent on the defensive line, but I do believe in what you have coming back there. Veteran and Albert Regis. You got DJ Hicks, former 5-star, who's been there, behind the Shamars, behind Nick Scorton, who's been waiting. He's produced some on the field, but he's going to be starting on that interior. And you've got Rylan Kennedy, you've got TJ Searcy, you've got Cassius Howell on the edge. Cassius Howell, who played last year with, he was probably a lot of times last year. Cassius Howell looked like the best edge guy that Texas A&M had, and that was a team that included a first round and several second round defensive line picks to the NFL. So I'm a big believer in the way that they're going to reload on the defensive side of the ball on the line of scrimmage this year. You've got great linebackers coming back. The question here is the secondary had to, kind of fudge the way that you schemed and played last year. You got Tyreek Chappelle back healthy. So if we can get, the secondary on the defensive side of the ball, if we can get them to cover better, pass breakups, turnovers, if we can get them to perform like they need to, Mike Elko obviously driving the defense this year, I think Texas A&M has a hell of a chance to have a great season and go 9-3. Your winnable games, I'd say 8 of them are winnable. 4 of them I would put are as very losable. Winnable games, obviously, UTSA and Utah State. Obviously, those are winnable. I put Notre Dame at Notre Dame I put it in the winnable column. Really probably should have put it on the losable side, but I just kind of tend to think that you're going to win that game. I think that you match up pretty evenly across the board as a team with Notre Dame, but I think your edge is at the quarterback position. And obviously that's an important spot to have an edge on the field. And so that's why I have picked you in that game against Notre Dame. Auburn, you should beat them. Tough to predict Auburn, but I think you should beat them, have the edge there. Beat Mississippi State. That's another winnable game. At Missouri, lot of turnover there. I think that, you're going on the road, but again, not a super tough place to play. No offense to the folks in Columbia, but it is what it is. South Carolina at home, I think they're going to take a step back. I think you match up. I think that you have a lot of advantages there. They don't have a great offensive line, whereas you're going to have a great defensive line. They have a good defensive line, but I think you have a probably top 10, in the country offensive line. So, and then Samford, obviously winnable game. So that's 8 on the winnable side. Losable, Florida. If I'm an Aggie, I'm a little scared of them coming to Kyle Field this year. But again, you mollywopped them in the swamp last season. At Arkansas, they always tend to bite somebody. That game is back in Fayetteville this year, no longer in Dallas. So first time you're taking a road trip there in about a decade, so that's going to be a tricky game for the Aggies. At LSU, you haven't won there since the 90s. I'd pick you to lose that game. Probably one of the top 3 hardest places to play in all of college football. Maybe top 2 between Neyland. Sorry, I was getting confused with Knoxville. No, Neyland in Knoxville, obviously, but Neyland Stadium, Death Valley, and Baton Rouge, 2 of the toughest places to play. But you've got to go to them this year. Home team has won that game for the last 6 years straight, so I'd expect that trend to continue. And then you wrap up the season at Texas. That's a very, very losable game, obviously. One of the talented roster there. So, but for the Aggies, got you going 9-3. But anyway, speaking of Texas. Arch Manning. He is the headliner of your roster. Winnable games, I've got 7. Texas has kind of a... you can look at their game twice in 2 days, and the first time you look at it, or not their game, at their schedule twice in the same day, and the first time you'll come away saying it's an easy schedule. The second time you can come away saying it's a hard schedule. So let me just go through this. Winnable games, San Jose State, UTEP, Sam Houston, no reason to waste time on those. At Kentucky, no reason you should lose that game. Kentucky, they don't roll over, but you should not lose to them. At Mississippi State, Vanderbilt, they tried to get you last year, but you should win that game. At Arkansas, same thing here. I think they're going to knock someone off this year. They always do, but you should win that game. It is kind of sandwiched in a funky way, so I'd look at that later in the year, but that's obviously you should win. Losable games, I got 5 for you. So at Ohio State, week 1, can't say that's not a losable game for you. At Florida, one of the toughest places to play in the SEC, which is a reason a lot of these are losable games for teams. If you get DJ Lagway healthy there, then that's just going to add to the troubles. Oklahoma is going to be much improved this year. At Georgia, they beat you twice last year. I think that they may continue kind of to slide a little bit, but you got that game at their place. Kirby Smart, they take a lot of pride in defending home field, playing nasty, gritty football. I think that, you're probably going to drop that game, especially on the road. And you're hosting, like I just mentioned, Texas A&M to finish the season. It's a losable game for both teams. Both teams could win it. Both, obviously someone's going to win, someone's going to lose, but it's not a gimme to anyone at this point. So, but the Red River Shootout there, that'll determine the record for both these teams. But Oklahoma, I like Oklahoma this year. I think that they're going to be a really, really tough team to play, a really gritty team, but I still think that they're going to ultimately kind of falter a little bit. I've got them, the Sooners, going 7-5. The games between winnable and losable on your schedule are kind of split down the middle. You got 6 that are winnable. I'd say 6 losable. Illinois State at Temple. Not sure how they convinced you to go on the road to play Temple this year, but it is what it is. You got Kent State. Those should all be wins. I don't think we're going to get any argument there. Then you got Ole Miss. I'd say that's, more likely a win than not. At Tennessee, defense travels. The way you're going to play offense, I think that's going to, kind of wear them down there in Neyland. It's going to be tough. I think that Oklahoma Brent Venables offense for whoever Tennessee's starting quarterback winds up being. But you also got Missouri at your place this year. Probably going to pick you in that one too. Losable games. Michigan in week 2, very losable game. It's kind of hard to tell how you match up, but I think they match up pretty similarly. Auburn, Texas. Auburn's going to be a tough one. Texas, that's the classic neutral site game there, but I'm going to give the edge to Texas, but it's a losable game really for both teams. At South Carolina, the most underrated place to play in the SEC. At Alabama, I would not expect you to come out of there with a win, and you also got LSU on the schedule to finish the year. Very tough stretch there of 6 teams for Oklahoma. That's why really I have you going 7-5. You could stun, and go, I'm not going to call 8-4 a stunner, but I think that if you do much better than 7-5, 8-4, it's going to be kind of a surprise with how difficult that road is for you. But moving on here, Auburn. I've said 1,000 times, and I'll say it 1,001, that Auburn is a tough team to predict. I really have not, it's just hard to get a finger on the pulse of that program, or just, how things are going to go there at quarterback. I got Auburn going 6-6. Unfortunately, I'm not a big believer in Hugh Freeze. Even if Jackson Arnold, plays better than he did last year, I don't think it's going to be enough to get them over that hump there. Winnable games, let's go through it real quick. Ball State, South Alabama, Missouri. I hate to hate on Missouri so much, but I just don't have high hopes for you this season. At Arkansas, Kentucky, and Mercer. Missouri, you could maybe convince me that that's more losable than not, but same thing with Arkansas, especially since it's on the road. But losable games, week 1 at Baylor. God, every time I bring up that game, I get excited. I don't think about it all day, but every time I go through and do this, and I think, I don't know. That's just an exciting matchup for me for some reason. But at Oklahoma, at Texas A&M, Georgia. I put Vanderbilt on here as losable just because of the Hugh Freeze Diego Pavia situation, with Diego Pavia being 3-0 against Hugh Freeze. That's just kind of funny. Had to add that there, of course. And then Alabama at the end of the year, obviously a losable game there. So Auburn, like I said, I've got you going 6-6 this year. Moving on, however, let's go up to Oxford, Mississippi with Ole Miss. The Fighting Lane Kiffins. I've got 7 games on your schedule that are more winnable than not. Georgia State at Kentucky, even though they beat you last year. Arkansas, Tulane, Washington State, Citadel for some reason, and at Mississippi State. I don't think I'm going to get a lot of argument there. I am looking forward to that Tulane game, though. You got 5 pretty losable games on your schedule. LSU, obviously, at Georgia. You got them last year, but you're on the road this season. I think they're going to get you back. At Oklahoma, South Carolina, and Florida on the losable side. So that's only 7 on the winnable side. I've got you going 8-4, which means you're going to have to pick somebody off. I think you're capable of doing that, but with that being said, Austin Simmons there. Not a lot of talk about Austin Simmons, and whenever his name does come up, people talk about him like he's a surefire, success there. Just really based off of one drive against Georgia, which, trust me, I was watching that drive. It was impressive. It was very fun to watch. That was a very, very fun moment, key moment in the game. He handled it very well. But you got to do it all season long. How is he going to handle the ups and downs of the season? Not discounting him, but we just don't know enough about him yet, like a lot of quarterbacks in this league. So, got you going 8-4. Down south in Baton Rouge, Brian Kelly's most talented team. 7 games are more winnable than not. 5 are very much losable. For the winnables, we got LA Tech, Southeast Louisiana, South Carolina, at Vanderbilt, at Ole Miss, Arkansas, and Western Kentucky. If you drop any of those games, then we've probably got bigger problems than we realize there. But losable, so where it gets fun, at Clemson, Florida, Texas A&M, at Alabama, and on the road to Oklahoma. Clemson week 1, definitely. I don't think I'm not picking that game yet, but I also don't want to surprise anyone. I'm probably going to pick Clemson. Florida, you got them at home. Texas A&M, you got them at home. If you can pick them off, that'll get you to the 9-3 number. At Alabama, at Oklahoma. So if you just lose at Clemson, at Alabama, at Oklahoma, it's not a bad season, but it's not what we want there. It's not what we expect whenever we have our most talented roster. Those are the words of Brian Kelly. But regardless, I think you're going to protect home field this year. I think you're going to get some road wins at Vanderbilt, at Ole Miss, but I think those 3 big ones at Clemson, at Alabama, at Oklahoma, I think you're going to drop those games more than likely. So that's going to result in a 9-3 record. Probably misses the playoff with that. I don't see you making the SEC championship because there's going to be a lot of carnage. But then again, that could work in your favor. And last but not least, as you are my pick to win the conference this year, Alabama, I do have you going. Actually, I'm going to save that for the end. Winnable games. I've got 10 that are winnable, only 2 that are losable. Sorry, counting's tricky sometimes. At Florida State, week 1, winnable game. I think you should pick them off, no problem. Actually, I was thinking about this earlier. That's kind of a Ty Simpson explosion game. I think that if you come out, who has been there at Alabama, hasn't played a lot, but, which, by the way, Ty Simpson is Alabama's starting quarterback this year. But I think that's a big Ty Simpson explosion game. If you come out and light it up at Florida State, like I kind of think you will, it's going to be off to the races there. At least until you run into, LSU. Maybe they're going to give you fits a little bit, but I still expect you to win that game. Regardless, moving on, spending too much time on that. At Florida State, winnable. ULM at home. Nick Saban's not here, so that's an easy win. I kid. Wisconsin, I don't think you're going to struggle with them. Vanderbilt. Some people might have put Vanderbilt in the losable category for this, but not I. Vanderbilt, you should win that game, even though, At Missouri, again, not a tough place to play. No offense. I've been to more than one game there in my lifetime. Fun place. It's a nice stadium, but not the toughest place in the conference to play. Tennessee, you got them at home. LSU at home. Oklahoma at home, East Illinois, and at Auburn. These are all very winnable games for the Crimson Tide. Part of that's because of how high I am on them. The game on this schedule I'd be worried about the most in the winnable section are LSU and at Auburn, but I think you're going to get those. Losable games. Georgia, obviously. Yeah, that's at Georgia this year, right? I think so, yeah. So at Georgia, at South Carolina. You won both of these games last year. South Carolina was a little bit more not inexplicable, but you got the ball bounced your way. I'll put it that way. Georgia, that for a while you looked like the best team in the country the way you're running away with that game against Georgia last year. But whenever they came back and took the lead, I thought for sure y'all were done. But you persevered. Is that good? You persevered. You beat the Bulldogs. So you got to go to their place this year. These are 2 very losable games. But I think you're going to get one of them, and that'll put you at 11-1. So, with that being said, quick summary here. Georgia 10-2, Florida 8-4, A&M 9-3, Texas 10-2, Oklahoma 7-5, Auburn 6-6, Ole Miss 8-4, LSU 9-3, Alabama 11-1. So, the grand finale. I think that Alabama is going to beat Texas to win the SEC championship. I think that we could see a situation like we did last year with Texas and Texas A&M competing for that final spot in the not the final spot in the playoff, competing to go to Atlanta with that final game of the year. Current odds to win the SEC, Bama, you are in third place at plus 480. Georgia in second place at Georgia and Texas are tied at plus 290. Then after Alabama, we got LSU at plus 600, and then a pretty big drop off to A&M at plus 1600. National championship odds for the SEC: Texas plus 550, Georgia plus 650. Bit of a drop off till we reach Bama at plus 1100, LSU plus 1400. Both Florida and A&M are tied for national championship odds at plus 3500, but nevertheless, Bama, I am expecting you to win the conference this year and make the 12-team college football playoff. Congratulations. All right, now that we have the SEC out of the way, going to move on here, and we're going to find ourselves in the Big 12. So, America's College Football Conference, as some call it, the Big 12. Very excited to what this conference has in store this year. But without further ado, Texas Tech. I am a big believer in Tech this year. I'd say for better or for worse, but it's probably for worse. I probably shouldn't be picking them or going in on them as hard as I am, but I don't know. Just something about them just screams, bet on us this year. So I think that team kind of has a chip on their shoulder. I think that with everything that they're doing there, all the investment in the roster around the program and the facilities, they've been very open and honest about how they're going to absolutely drop bags to acquire talent, which is fine. I'm kind of a fan of that. A lot of teams do it. A lot of teams have done it for a long time, and there's no reason to hide it. So Texas Tech, 10 games I would put in the winnable category for you. Arkansas, Pine Bluff, Kent State, Oregon State. I think at Utah, fun game to watch. Going to be probably a pretty physical game, but I think that you will wind up winning that one. At Houston, Kansas, Oklahoma State, BYU, UCF, and at West Virginia, who's going to end up being a scrappy team. I just don't think they're going to be quite there yet. Losable, Arizona State and Kansas State, both of those games on the road. Regardless, high hopes for Texas Tech this year. I don't think that you're automatically going to lose or, lose either one of those games or even win all of them, but I still have your record in the 10-2 range, so that's kind of what I'm expecting from Tech this year. But speaking of Utah, I think we're going to have a bounce back year. 8 of your games I find to be more winnable than not. At UCLA, Cal Poly, at Wyoming, you shouldn't really struggle with any of those opponents. West Virginia, again, going to be a scrappy game here. It's probably going to be a really, I kind of get the sense that this might be a rock fight between these two teams. But, again, they're a scrappy opponent, but I don't think they're quite there yet in West Virginia. At BYU, Colorado, Cincinnati, and at Kansas, those games I would say are more winnable than not for you. As far as losable games go, Texas Tech, Arizona State, at Baylor, and Kansas State. Bit of a tough schedule there when you add those teams into the mix. Not a guarantee you're going to win all your winnable ones either, but that puts you at 8-4. Just kind of quickly moving on here. Arizona State. 8 of your games are winnable, in my opinion. More winnable than they are losable. Northern Arizona, at Mississippi State, Texas State, at Utah, Houston at home, West Virginia at home, Colorado on the road, and Arizona at home. Losable at Baylor, TCU, Texas Tech, and at Iowa State. So winnable, losable, 8 are winnable, 4 losable. I think you're going to, overperform in that sense and wind up going 9-3, which means you're going to pick off someone on the losable games. Probably TCU, just because I think Baylor on the road, they're going to be a tough out. Texas Tech, I think, is going to get you, and at Iowa State again on the road, going to be a tough out. So that puts that win against TCU. So 9-3 for Arizona State is kind of where I'm at. Colorado, spare me on this one. Just spare me. Colorado, can we be honest about them? I mean, nothing against Colorado, nothing against Dion, but by the way, this could come back to bite me in the ass since I'm so definite on it. But they're going to fall back hard this year. 5-7 is what I've got. 5 games are winnable. Delaware at Houston, Wyoming at West Virginia, Arizona. Those are your 5 most winnable games. Losable, Georgia Tech, BYU at TCU, Iowa State at Utah, Arizona State, and at Kansas State. I don't think that you match up well with any of those teams. I think that while you may have a good, some good pieces on your offense, it's not going to be what it was last year. You're not going to have Shedeur Sanders back there, just, miracle playing for you, essentially. Heisman winner and Travis Hunter's obviously gone, so 5-7 for Colorado. I'm just going to leave it at that. Moving on, on to Baylor. The Fighting Baylor Bears. All right. Baylor, Samford at Oklahoma State, Kansas State at Cincinnati, UCF, Utah at Arizona, and Houston. These are games that I would say are winnable for Baylor, a team that I am pretty high on this season. That's 8 games, that leaves 4 for the losable category, and Auburn at home, at SMU, Arizona State, and at TCU. I think you're going to pick off Auburn. I think you could lose the other 3 that I just mentioned. That would put you at 9-3 this year. So, it'd be a good season for Baylor. It'd be a good season for Dave Aranda. Would that springboard him into a higher job? Maybe one that opened in the SEC or elsewhere? Who knows? Who knows? But that will leave Kansas State, last but not least. 9 of your games, highly winnable. North Dakota, Army, Arizona, UCF, TCU, at Kansas, at Oklahoma State, at Utah, and Colorado. I think we should win all those games before Kansas State. Got some tough ones in the losable category with Iowa State and that week 0 game that we're 9 days away from, at Baylor and Texas Tech. God, I can't believe that we're only 9 days away. We're barely more than a week. So this weekend is going to be probably boring as all hell, and next week is probably going to crawl by just because we have college football to look forward to. But with that being said, I think for the Big 12 championship that we are going to see Texas Tech beating Baylor. Wouldn't that be crazy? I think Texas Tech is going to get the job done this year. They're going to win the Big 12 and make the playoffs. Current odds for the Big 12, Texas Tech and Kansas State are tied at plus 550 with Arizona State. 3 teams there tied atop. Utah plus 600, Baylor plus 650. Current national title odds, not great. Utah, Arizona State, Kansas State, Texas Tech, they're all tied at plus 10,000. So not a lot of diversity in the odds for the national championship, and a little bit more diversity, but not quite enough at the top there for the conference. So regardless, Texas Tech, you're my pick to win the Big 12. You're my pick from the Big 12 to make the playoff. And yeah, that's the Big 12 for you. So let's move on to the Big 10. Big 10 country. Up in Michigan, we have the Michigan Wolverines to kick us off, who have an eye-popping 9.5 over-under win total. If you go through their schedule, you'll understand why, but I'm predicting them to go under on that. 7 of your games, I'd say, for Michigan are of the winnable variety. New Mexico, Central Michigan, Wisconsin, at Michigan State, Purdue, at Northwestern, and Maryland. If you drop any of those, unless Michigan State is just highly improved, which relatively speaking they will be, but I don't think improved enough to beat you. If you drop any of those, I think we're going to have some bigger problems this year. But losable at Oklahoma week 2. I think at Nebraska, that's going to be a tricky game. At USC, you got to go way out to Southern California. I think they're going to be, improved kind of just overall. This year it's just a question of how measurable is that improvement? Does it really show up for them in the record? Guess we'll find out. Washington and Ohio State. So it's a tricky schedule. You have 7, all due respect, you have 7 essentially gimmies here. And then you have 5 that are, going to be tough, but I think that I think Ohio State might get you this year. I think Washington's a pretty underrated team coming into the season. We'll see how that pans out. I think USC and Nebraska both have the potential to give you just fits up and down the field, and I think that game at Oklahoma in week 2 is probably the one I'm most concerned about right now. So that I'm gonna predict you to go 8-4 this year. 9-3, would not surprise me at all. I would, it's essentially a coin flip that, between 8-4 and 9-3. Regardless, that's the under on 9.5. So should be a pretty decent year all around, but 8-4 is where I landed on Michigan, which I'm sure the folks not up since they're south of you, south in Ohio, in Columbus, Ohio, at Ohio State are happy to hear that, who I have 8 games that are winnable on their schedule. Grambling, Ohio, Minnesota, at Illinois, at Wisconsin, at Purdue, UCLA, and Rutgers. At Illinois, of those winnable ones, is probably the most tricky. Looking at it preseason, of your losable, Texas week 1, obviously, at Washington, Penn State, and at Michigan. Texas game, I'm excited to break that one down. We're essentially at a coin flip here. I think that game is similar to the A&M Notre Dame game in a sense, where they're both teams kind of mirror each other a lot. At Washington, tough place to play. Really dynamic quarterback. It's going to be a team that's going to give you fits. Tricky game there. Penn State, I know, here we go again with Penn State, but obviously, it's always a losable game. You just always tend to win it. So, and then at Michigan, I expect you to get that one this year, but then again, you were a 3-point favorite last year and, just completely faltered embarrassingly. So that's obviously a losable game for the Buckeyes. But regardless, not going to harp on it too much because we have Oregon to talk about, who just was blessed with a schedule. Montana State, Oklahoma State, at Northwestern, Oregon State, Indiana, at Rutgers, Wisconsin, at Iowa, Minnesota, USC. Those are all pretty winnable games if you ask me. Iowa and USC are probably the toughest of those winnable games. You're losable at Penn State, obviously at Washington, that rivalry game, very losable for Oregon. But regardless, I think Oregon's going to go 11-1 this year. So there's that. Penn State, at Penn State, I think that's going to be a tough game. I think that's going to be the one that you're going to drop if you're Oregon, but we'll find out. Washington, 8-4 is where I have you, with 7 games that I would say are winnable. Colorado State, UC Davis, at Maryland, at Wisconsin, Purdue, and at UCLA. I think those are, you shouldn't really. Wisconsin's going to be tough for them, but I think they're gonna pull that one out. Losable, 5 of them. Already kind of touched on them, as you've been on these teams' schedules so far as we've gone through it. Ohio State, Rutgers, at Michigan, Illinois, and Oregon. 5 losable games, 7 winnable. Again, I think that puts you at the 8-4 mark. You're gonna have to pick somebody off on the losable side, but I think you're going to have a good year last year, relatively speaking, and the job that Jedd Fisch is doing there is going to kind of start to show this year up in the record category. Moving on to Illinois. This one's a little bit backwards in a sense. I'll explain why once I finish going through it, but you've got 9 games that I'd say are winnable. Western Illinois, at Duke, Western Michigan, at Indiana, at Purdue, Rutgers, Maryland, at Wisconsin, and Northwestern. 3 losable, USC and Ohio State, and at Washington. I kind of expect you, if you're Illinois, to lose all of your losable games, which would be 3 losses. And then I think that it's very highly possible that you could drop one of your winnable games, at Wisconsin being a likely one in my opinion. So that puts you at 8-4 this year, which is going to be disappointing because you had a great season last year, high expectations this year, or at least similar expectations to, push for the Big Ten title game, maybe push for a spot in the playoff. But unfortunately, I think that you're going to wind up going 8-4. Speaking of disappointment, oh God, that was a horrible way to start this. But Nebraska, I'm sorry. I promise I like Nebraska. Don't let that little intro to them fool you. But 7 games that are winnable, 5 that are losable. I think that's about, what your record's going to wind up being, 7-5. On the winnable side, we got at Cincinnati, Akron, Houston Christian, Michigan State, at Maryland, Northwestern, at UCLA. I think you should pull those out. Michigan at Minnesota, USC at Penn State and Iowa. I think those games are clear cut losable. I think that they're almost all of them are clear cut losses, which would put Nebraska at 7-5. But at least you make a bowl game again. But again, I've kind of touched on this, I think, in the last episode or two. Matt Rule, year 3, that's kind of what everyone looks at. Unfortunately, I just don't think that's going to pan out here in the Big Ten this season. They just seem to be missing something. Like, I can't quite put my finger on it, but it just seems like they're missing that, the talent, I guess I would say, to get them to that kind of next level, to that 8-9 win mark. It just feels like we're missing just a touch. We're off just a step, and it's kind of going to hold us back again this year. And if that happens, we may see, some tough questions start to be asked there at Nebraska. But speaking of places that could have a lot of tough questions this year, USC with Lincoln Riley. Winnable and losable games split down the middle at 6-6 with Missouri State, Georgia Southern, at Purdue, Michigan State, Northwestern, and UCLA in the winnable category. If you drop any of those games, honestly, we're in for a hell of a ride with this coaching search that we'd have, but because that probably means you're dropping a lot of these losable games too, who I have at Illinois, Michigan, at Notre Dame, at Nebraska, Iowa, and at Oregon. Tough road stretch you have. Nebraska always sells out their stadium. At Notre Dame's a tough one, or at Oregon's going to be a tough game. So I do think that you could wind up going 8-4, which is where I have you pegged for the record. But again, tough stretch you're going to have. You don't have to play Penn State, though, who I do have to finish up here with the Big Ten. Penn State, 11 of your games, I would say, are pretty winnable. Again, feels repetitive saying that, but that's what I decided to do. Nevada, FIU, Villanova, at UCLA, Northwestern at Iowa, Indiana at Michigan State, Nebraska, and at Rutgers. That's 10 games that I would say are highly winnable. Losable, you got Oregon at home and Ohio State on the road. I tend to think that you're going to pick off Oregon. I think that with you going on the road to Ohio State, I think both of you are coming off a bye week. So I think that Ohio State's probably going to have the edge there. But regardless, that puts you in the conference championship, in my opinion. Penn State, I think you will make the conference championship game in back-to-back seasons, but this year I think you will win it. And who will you play? I think that you're going to beat Oregon in the regular season and keep them out of the conference title because you're going to have the head-to-head over them, and I think you're going to lose to Ohio State, winding up going 11-1. I think that puts you in the conference championship game against Ohio State, and I think that you win the conference against Ohio State. I think they get you in the regular season. We have that whole James Franklin can't win the Big One talk, even though you will have just beaten Oregon. But again, we'll be right back around to that chatterbox talking point. But then you'll turn around and you'll beat them in the Big Ten conference championship game, which will send you happily to the college football playoffs. Current odds to win the conference: Ohio State plus 195, Penn State plus 210, Oregon plus 430, and then we got to drop off to Michigan at plus 1,000, USC at plus 1,900. National title odds: Ohio State plus 650, Penn State plus 700. So, but congratulations, Penn State. I think you're going to finally knock off Ohio State, like I said, in that conference game, that conference championship game. So. But that'll do it for the Big Ten. 3 down, 1 to go. On to the ACC, who is last but not least, although some might disagree with that. But last but not least in my mind, let's kick it off with Miami. 10-2 is where I have you. Over under coming into the year 9.5, so that would put you on the over side of the spectrum. I think you're going to improve defensively. By how much is the question? How measurable is it? But I think there is going to be some defensive improvement there. I think we're going to be pretty good on offense. We don't really have a too tough of a schedule. Not a murderer's row by any means. 10 games are pretty winnable. Bethune, South Florida at Florida State, Louisville, Stanford at SMU, Syracuse, NC State at Virginia Tech, and at Pitt. I think you will probably win all 10 of those losable games. Notre Dame and Florida. I think you could lose both of those and win all your winnable. That would put you at 10-2. Since both of your losses are out of conference, that would put you solidly in the conference championship game. Spoiler alert for all of you there. Georgia Tech, I think you're going to continue your growth there. However, I do think you may fall short against Clemson and Georgia. But you're over under 7-5. I think you're going over this year. 9 games are pretty winnable. At Colorado, Gardner-Webb, Temple, at Wake Forest, Virginia Tech, Syracuse, at NC State, at Boston College, and Pitt. I think you pick all of them off. Excuse me. Don't want to get too far ahead of myself. 3 losable games. Clemson at Duke, Georgia. I don't think you pick all of them off. I misspoke there. I think that you can lose all of your losable games. I think that I'm high on Brinke. I'm high on Georgia Tech. For a little while there, I was ready to make some irresponsible predictions about Georgia Tech, but I think that you may end up getting picked off by someone who should be a winnable game. That will put you at 8-4, which is the over on the win total, but I would think that would probably be kind of a disappointing year, even though for Georgia Tech, that's a pretty damn good season. I'm a little more modest than I expected to be. I don't know. I just got a weird sense that maybe they just kind of fall short a touch, but I still am very high on them. Still looking forward to watching them play this year. Very excited about that. Very excited about Haynes King and the returners they have coming back. But down in Florida, got Florida State. Let's see here. I think you're just going to beat who you're supposed to this year, and who you're supposed to beat is East, Texas A&M, Kent State, at Virginia, at Stanford. I think you're going to beat them. Wake Forest, Virginia Tech, and NC State. I think those are wins for you. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 losable. I think you're probably going to drop all of these. Alabama, Miami, Pitt, at Clemson, at Florida. I think you're probably going to push Miami. You're probably going to push Clemson, but you're going to wind up going 7-5, which that's under your over-under at 7.5. So better year this year than last year, but still kind of a disappointing season there in Tallahassee. Speaking of disappointing seasons, I don't think we'll have that talking point around this team. Clemson, 9 games, pretty winnable. Troy, Syracuse, North Carolina, Boston College, SMU, Duke, Florida State, Louisville, and Furman. Is Clemson elite? Because if Clemson is elite this year, then they win all their games. Pretty cut and dry, simple as that. If you're elite, you win all your games. If you're not elite, I could see you going 10-2 because you have 3 that are fairly losable. LSU, week 1, Georgia Tech on the schedule, and South Carolina, who you lost to last year. So if you're not elite, I think you're probably going to wind up going 10-2. If you are elite, like I said, you could win all your games, going undefeated, maybe 11-1. So that's kind of where my head's at with Clemson. Louisville, harder team to predict, but I did my best. East Kentucky, JMU, Bowling Green at Pitt, Virginia, Boston College at Virginia Tech, Cal, and Kentucky. You should win those games. You got at Miami, Clemson, and at SMU. Those are pretty losable. I've got you going 9-3, kind of beating who you're supposed to beat, losing to who you're supposed to lose to, for lack of a better term. But that's where my head's at with Louisville. SMU, speak of the devil, 7 games are pretty winnable. East Texas A&M, Missouri State, Syracuse, Stanford, at Wake Forest, at Boston College, at Cal. I think you're probably going to win those games. Losing to Baylor, at TCU, at Clemson, Miami, or Louisville, that puts you at 7-5, which coming off that playoff season you had last year, ACC conference title appearance, that's going to be considered a disappointment, but I think that's what I'm expecting there from SMU. And wrapping up here with the Fighting Bill Belichick's in North Carolina, 8 games, which, by the way, can you believe Bill Belichick is the head coach at North Carolina? Wonder how he's going to pan out. Not a ton of precedent for this, to be honest. Not that I would lie about that, but yeah, not a lot of precedent for someone like Bill Belichick coming into college football at a place like North Carolina, but a lot of new pieces. I think that they will have some success, but it's not going to be, what we would want it to be. 8 games are pretty winnable at Charlotte, Richmond, at UCF, at Cal, Virginia, at Syracuse, Stanford, at Wake Forest. Not tough there at all. TCU, Clemson, Duke, and at NC State are all where I would say, wind up in the losable category. I think that you could get picked off by someone just with the, large amounts of transition there and the, I don't want to say turmoil, but just the unprecedented situation of the coaching staff. I think you're going to find yourself going 7-5, which is under the over-under win total of 7.5. That would leave Clemson and Miami for the ACC championship. I think Clemson beats Miami. I think the two clearly separate, but Clemson's obviously going to be the better team is what I'm predicting here. Could see maybe Miami run out of gas too, kind of at the end of the season like we did last year. Current odds for the ACC: Clemson plus 110, Miami plus 380, Louisville plus 750, SMU plus 950, Clemson plus 1100, and Miami you are plus 3500 for the national championship. So that does it for the regular season. Now let's move on to the playoff. Well, I've got our conference winners at Alabama, Clemson in the ACC, Penn State in the Big Ten, and Texas Tech for the Big 12. So those are your conference champions. Unlike last year, the conference champions do not get an automatic bye. So for the playoff, I think our top 4 seeds are going to go to Bama at number 1. Clemson will come in at number 2 with Penn State, 3rd, and Oregon to follow at number 4. I think those are going to be the teams that get byes this year. So that's your top 4 for the playoff. Texas at number 5. I think they're going to make the playoff. Ohio State, it's hard to kind of leave them out with the way that they've been playing ball lately. I think Notre Dame, only really 2 games I'd be worried about, Miami and Texas A&M. And even if you lost both of those, I still think that Notre Dame at 10-2 is going to get in, regardless of whether or not we think they should. Texas Tech, the Big 12 champion, I think you're going to make the playoff this season. Georgia, still maybe some regression, but I think you're just going to kind of continue that gritty style of play. You're going to win just enough, going probably 10-2, making the playoff, coming in at number 9. Miami, I think you're going to kind of the same thing here. I think you're going to make the playoff this year. And Texas A&M, I think that A&M is going to have a record of 9-3, but I think they're going to be a 9-3 that makes the playoff because I think there's going to be a lot of carnage in the SEC, a lot of bullets flying around, a lot of teams racking up a lot of losses, but I think you're going to go 9-3 and make the playoff, probably at the number 11 spot, leaving number 12 open for Boise State to make their reappearance. But for A&M, I think we're going to see a 9-3 team make the playoff, sooner rather than later. I don't think that's crazy, and I think it'll be them this year. So, regardless, that is my playoff field prediction, which means I have come to the conclusion, and this is backed by science, so don't doubt me on this. I have come to the conclusion, and I am ready to make the announcement that the Clemson Tigers will be your 2025 season, 2026 national champion. Congratulations, Dabo Swinney. You have reinvigorated your image. You have proven all of the haters wrong. You have refused to use the transfer portal, and you will still win national championships there at Clemson. In all seriousness, I think Clemson, ton of returning production. Are they number one? I don't remember. They're number 1, 2, 3, somewhere in there for returning production on a very talented team. I think you've got good receivers. You've got a great defense, a veteran quarterback. I think you're going to have a good run game. I think Clemson is just overall a highly balanced, highly talented football team. And I think that they are going to, get through the ACC relatively unscathed and be fresh and ready with a bye in the playoff. And I think that's going to allow them to springboard into the national championship game and win. Who will they beat for the national championship? Could be Texas, could be Ohio State again, could be Oregon, but I think that Penn State will make the national championship game and fall to Clemson. I think that, for lack of a better description, I think that maybe the spotlight at this point might be, a little too much for Penn State. Maybe I just kind of see them playing really well all year long, and then once we get to a game like this, I just think that they could have a fall off there at the end of the year. But regardless, Clemson, that is who I'm predicting to win the national championship. Also the ACC, Bama, and the SEC again. Penn State in the Big Ten and Texas Tech in the Big 12. But regardless, that is my overall regular season prediction. That's my playoff field prediction. That's my national championship prediction. I'm sure that anyone who hears this will have nothing to disagree with me about. I'm sure I will receive no complaints from this. Again, like I said, this is backed by science, so don't doubt me for a second. But regardless, I appreciate you listening. This has been another episode of the College Football Podcast. Make sure you follow me on X at Campus Pigskin. Instagram if you want, but I haven't posted over there in months. I'm on X all the time though. So if you want to follow me on there, that would be mighty appreciated. Make sure you subscribe if you're listening on YouTube. Follow the podcast feed if you are listening to me on a podcast version, and leave a 5-star review, like whatever good stuff you can. So I'd appreciate it. And until next time, thanks for listening. By the way, we have games in 9 days. Ooh.